Welcome to DEC App Development, Learning from 0 to 1, Hello World video tutorial. This tutorial is based on the template project created by CYFS DApp client scaffolding and developed with an emulator environment. Now let's complete the following 4 preparatory operations. First, make sure you have exported your identity to your computer through cyber chat. Let's verify it. Under the CYFS profile folder, if you can see 2 people files, it means that your identity has been successfully imported to your computer. Second, make sure you have installed the latest stable version of Node.js and Yarn. Third, install CYFS tool globally and the CYFS DApp client scaffolding. Note that if you are using nightly version, then you need to install the corresponding nightly version of the tool. Okay. Fourth, under the folder that you think is suitable, using scaffolding to create a DEC App project template. Here we go. We created it under the folder tutorial. Okay, we create a Hello demo project. Then we need to wait patiently for a while. Now we can see that the project has been created and an app ID has been generated. Next, we use VS Code to open the created project. Okay. After entering the project, we execute yarn in the root directory. Install all dependencies required by the project. Now we can see the dependencies of the project has been installed. There are 3 folders in the src directory: common, service, 3w. Common is the code that can be reused by the front end and the service end. Service is the code of the service side. 3w is the code of front end. The final interaction result is, after all the development for this Hello World tutorial, click the Hello World button on the front end page to initiate a request to interact with the Hello World interface. To initiate a request to interact with the Hello World interface on the server side, the request carries the Hello Request custom request object. The object will contain a string of jack. After the server side handles the request, it will return a Hello Response custom response object, which will contain a string of Hello Jack, welcome to CYFS world. After the front end receives the response, a pop-up window will show up with content: Hello Jack, welcome to CYFS world. First, let's look at the front end. Under the 3w directory contains all the code of the front end project. It is a standardized React-based project. Here we only focus on the following 3 files. The first one is under 3w. initialize.ts. This file is used to initialize the stack. Stack is short for shared CYFS stack. The second file is hello.ts under APIs_3W. This file is a module that contains the Hello World request interface. The third file is welcome file under pages_3W. This contains the Hello World button and the trigger events. Open initialize.ts file on the 3W folder. Comment out the old init method. First, export the stack object. Create new init method. Define the HTTP port of Zone 1 in the emulator. Define the WebSocket port of Zone 1 in the emulator. Define DEC ID. Define the parameter object to open the stack. If there is an error, print the error message and return. If there is no error, open the stack. Then, wait for the stack to go online. If there is an error, we print the error and continue the loop. Otherwise, go online successfully and end the loop. The above is the front-end initialization code. This is the whole process of opening and waiting for a stack to go live. Next, we will explain the development of the Hello World request interface. The front-end needs to use post-object method in non-service of the shared CYFS stack instance to initialize a request to the service side. This method contains an input parameter and a return object. The input parameter is an object which implemented NON post object output request interface. The return value is an object which implemented NON post object output response interface. Let's jump in and take a look. These two interfaces both have a feature that contains an attribute called object. The type is class NON object info. We continue to jump to see the constructor of this class. There are three input parameters. We only focus on the first two. The type of the first two parameters are object ID and uint8 array. These two parameters actually point to the same object. That is to say, if you want to make a complete request, you need to define a request object and a response object. In this demo, we name the request object as Hello Request Object. Name the response object as Hello Response Object. We open the SRC folder, Common folder, Objects folder. It stores all custom object files. Under Objects folder, open .photo file. The first line of the file says syntax equals proto3, means This Proto file uses Proto 3. Students who have used the tool Proto 3 should not be unfamiliar with it. Our custom objects just uses Proto 3 to implement encoding and decoding of various custom objects. Don't worry if you haven't used this tool. You just need to understand the most basic usage of Proto 3. It can meet most of the development needs. Let's take a look now. This is the request object, hello request object. This is the response object, hello response object. Not difficult to see that Proto 3 uses keyword message to define the object. Both objects are relatively simple. Request object contains only one property name of type string. Response object contains only one property greet of type string. Now we use Proto 3 to generate TypeScript and JavaScript object definition. Take a look at the package.json file first. There are two commands here, proto-mac pre, proto-mac. We execute these two commands on Mac, then can generate the TypeScript and the JavaScript object definition we needed. After execution, a .js and a .d.ts file are added in the obj.js directory. Open declaration file. We can see type definitions of our request and response objects. Under the obj.js folder, we can see hello request object.ts and hello response object.ts. These two object definition files. This is predefined for us. It contains all the properties and methods of the request object and the response object. It is worth mentioning that if we want to customize an object, we can use either of these two files as a template. First, look at hello request object.ts, the request object definition file. Focus on these two classes. Class hello request object, a class that can be used to create hello request object instance using the create method. Class hello request object decoder is used to decode the object to get hello request object. This is the definition file of hello response object.ts response object. Again, just focus on these two classes. Class hello response object is used to create a response object using the create method. Class hello response object decoder is used to decode objects to get hello response objects. After we define the request and response object, now we start writing the hello world request API. Open the hello.ts file under 3w under APIs. Let's start coding. First, import CYFS and stack. Export the hello world function. Define DEC ID. Define owner. Go to the emulate file to view the people ID corresponding to zone 1. Create hello request object. Make a request. This is error handling. Use hello response object decoder to decode. This is error handling. We get hello response object. Console printing and the pop-up window show the grid string value of hello response object. Now our Hello World request API is completed. Now let's modify the front-end Hello World button and on-click events. Open the welcome file on the 3W folder on the Pages folder. Modify its on-click method. Replace it with the Hello World method just defined. The front-end Hello World coding is completed now. Next, we develop the Hello World interface on server side. Now we start explaining the development of Hello World interface on server side. In order to facilitate the separate demonstration of the development, we create a new Hello Service folder in the src directory. This folder will contain all the code required by the Hello World server side. We create an app startup.ts file in this folder. Now we write the service startup program. We create app startup.ts file on the Hello Service folder. Start coding. Import CYFS SDK. Import Hello World router module. Defines the type of router function post router. Define post router rack path router handler class. Inherit router handler post object routine interface. Define private property router. Define constructor. Implement abstract method call. Define main function. Define the HTTP and WebSocket part of Zone 1 in the emulator. Define DEC ID. Define the parameter object to open the stack. If there is an error, print the error and return. Otherwise, open the stack. Then, wait for the stack to go online. If there is an error, print the error and continue the loop. If there is no error, exit. Configure access for the request path. Open write and call permissions to current zone of the current path. Open write and call permissions to the current DEC app of the current path. Set access permission of test hello directory. If there is an error in the stack, print the error and exit. Otherwise, it means that access is set successfully. Next, we register the router. If there is an error, print the error message. Otherwise, print success information. Run the main function. The above is the service startup program. Up to now, the service launching code has been completed. Next, we will explain Hello World Router module. Now let's implement the Hello World Router module. We create hello world.ts file under the Hello Service folder. Let's start coding. Import CYFS, Hello Response Object, Hello Request Object Decoder, and App Object Type. Export the Hello World Router function. Destructing the request object. Check whether the request object exists and whether it is a hello request object. Next, decode and get the name value of hello request object. Create hello response object. Finally, return the hello response object to the front end. We have completed all the code required for the Hello World project. Now let's run it in the emulator. Now, let's start the emulator. We find the emulator program corresponding to your system under the root directory of the project, on the Tools folder, on the Zoo Simulator folder. Then run it. Here we open Mac x86. In Mac system, we need to modify this file's executable permission to let the emulator program be executed normally. Now let's modify. Done. Now run the emulator. Okay, our emulator program is running. Now let's start running the front-end project. Type in the following command in the project root directory. We can see that if we visit localhost port 8088 in CYFS browser, you can see our front-end page. Now we'll wait for Webpack to package. Okay, packaging is complete. Let's take a look. Here we can see the front-end page now. Here is a Hello World button. Now let's run the server side. To run the service, we need to use DEC to compile the TS files in the project into JS. Type in the following command in the root directory. After execution, we can see that a deploy folder is added in the root directory. This folder is the entire project.js folder. After compilation, we copy the proto.js file under src, under common, under op.js to the folder under deploy, under src, under common, under op.js. Finally, we execute the following command in the root directory. Launch service. Okay, this means that our service has been launched normally. Now let's test the interaction effect. The interaction effect we expect is, on the front-end page, we click the Hello World button. A box will pop up. The content in the box is, Hello Jack, welcome to CYFS World. Now check it out. Yes, it works. Here, our Hello World tutorial is all done. One tip here. If the final interaction effect is not as expected, please follow the documentation for this video. Check your code line by line. Pay special attention to parameters like DEC ID, owner ID, such things. These need to be replaced by your own application IDs. Thank you.